3 months, so I'm super excited about it. Glad you guys are all here. It's super fun and meant to be interactive, so please ask lots of questions. Anybody know what FIA stands for? A couple of hands. Yes, it does stand for fuck it all, okay? Now, this isn't just an excuse to swear and drink beer, okay? Even though that's fun, but really, the FIA is important to me. It's been a passion of mine since I was a kid, and that's what we want to promote at Mission35 Mortgages is what's your FIA number? You know, getting to a number of financial security in your life where you can have courage to really sort of pursue your dreams. So by having financial security in my life, and I'm not a rich guy by any means, but it definitely gave me the courage to do something like this. Otherwise, I wouldn't invite people over to my office, sell mortgages, and drink beer. Okay? So, and I think we're really passionate about, and I know Tobias is as well too, is about demystifying financial freedom. You guys ever watch podcasts, listen to podcasts, watch YouTube stuff, and you see like Ty Lopez on there, Grant Cardone, and all these guys? Think they're awesome, but they're all in like bikinis, Lamborghinis, and they have all this money and wheels up and doing stuff, and I think that's what financial freedom is. But there's a big step before that, and I think that's financial security, right? And I think once you have financial security, it gives you a little bit more courage to maybe reach for those stars, to do that kind of stuff, right? And I think, you know, we promote real estate investment. Your house is your biggest investment of your life. So if you can take care of your wealth that way with real estate, you can maybe achieve that financial security, which is our hope. And then, hey, go for the Lamborghini if you want to. Why not?
I prefer Ferrari.
Yeah. He's a lawyer. That's why. He's a lawyer. You can get the Ferrari. So who are these amazing people? So this is Greg Malia. He is a partner at Regency Law. Woo! We love Regency Law, right? That's great. Yeah, totally. So, young guy, so tell them about how long you've been in business for over there at Regency.
So Regency Law Group is Hamilton's newest full-service law firm. My partner, Eric Naniakar, and I started it May 1st, 2017. And Regency was born out of the need to service the community at large. We found ourselves in a well-known Hamilton firm working together, working for a lot of clients that we didn't have contact with. So our goal was to break free of those chains and service the community that we live, work, and play in. And that's what Regency is essentially born out of. So we do, in addition to real estate, we have a healthy litigation practice, family, criminal, and corporate. We like to service all practice areas because we like to really involve ourselves with the clients, understand their needs, their assets, their liabilities, so that we can craft kind of a life plan for them.
It's true. And you guys do an amazing job at taking care of people, right?
Right.
And we were talking downstairs. We'll get into some of those fun-filled litigation stories that you get into with tenants as well, too.
It do get interesting.
Yeah, so ask questions to this guy about it because he will know the answer when it comes down to tenants. And then we've got this. Everybody know Tobias? Yeah, real estate agent extraordinaire. I've known Tobias for a while, and I'm so proud of you for last night at the RE/MAX Awards. This guy had to bring up a wheelbarrow to take home all of his awards. Okay? Yeah, no, he won Chairman Award, best team, or best
top 5 individual.
Top 5 individual. That's amazing, man.
Yeah.
But real estate agent, investor, construction company. I don't know. You probably do a ton more things I don't even know about.
I keep busy.
Rentals. Rentals, yeah, totally. So tell me about how you got, because I love Tobias' story, because you got into when you really had humble beginnings as well, too.
Yeah. So I started, just worked a normal job, wanted to find a way to make extra money and buy my first house. And out of necessity needed rental income. And then felt like this is not too shabby. And got another house and another, and said, I think I could make a career out of this. Real estate thing, got licensed and started helping people kind of grow their portfolio and transfer some of my experiences, and good and bad, over to people and help them, you know, get the jitters or demystify it a little bit too.
Yeah. Well, you do a great job with that, right? And I love the fact that you are living it as well too. You know, there's a lot of people out there who sell real estate or sell investment properties that haven't owned one yet, right?
Yeah.
So now you're out there living in one and selling them as well too.
Yeah.
So what we want to talk about today is tenants. How many people love tenants? Woo! Yes, we do, because they pay the bills. Okay, so we do, right? But it's important that we know a lot about it too, right? Because I think part of owning investment property is being prudent in protecting it as well too. So you got to keep up with all the laws and regulations and things like that too.
Absolutely.
So we have Greg here.
That's
love
right.
Greg. Somebody get Greg a beer. Okay. But so for those of you who don't know, the new lease agreements are coming out April 30th. Right? So what we wanted to do is sort of talk about it, right? Because I remember when I first looked at this, I'll be guilty and thought like, oh shit, I've been doing some things wrong. Right? So have you looked at this yet? Have you had a sort of look?
I took a look through it, and I was surprised that I felt like when they made it, Province of Ontario, whoever makes this stuff up, did a pretty good job. I thought they did a really good job covering a lot of topics that are kind of gray areas or people didn't know, you know, the right answer for it, and they sort of lay it out very clear in big font on multiple pages.
Well, I think, you know what, at first I was kind of frustrated. I think most of us are whenever there's a big rule change or something like that, because the first thing I always think about is work. I'm like, oh man, like I got to do a lot of work now, right? But I think it is pretty well laid out. Like, what do you think about it, Greg? Like when it comes down to
I like it. I like it, and I think that the purpose of this agreement is to essentially bring matters that can be resolved between landlords and tenants. The resolution can be found within those parties. There's not really a need to go to the landlord-tenant board for things that can be resolved at home. So I think the landlord-tenant board does a great job of hearing and processing disputes, but a lot of the disputes can be resolved at home. And this agreement is streamlined so that all rental agreements that are being entered into are using the same form. That allows the landlord-tenant board to, instead of be bogged down by certain details that may be unenforceable in otherwise sound residential real estate rental contracts, they've created a system where once they come in, they process them quickly. They understand this is an issue we see all the time. Here's how to resolve it quickly, or this is not an issue that needs to be resolved because it's in the agreement. So we don't need to have the administrative process of making an application, going before the board, having a hearing, and incurring all sorts of costs that you don't need to incur because it's in the agreement.
You know what? That's actually a point that I actually thought it'd be more cumbersome, but when you say it, it actually makes sense, right? Because how many people, has anybody here been to the landlord-tenant board? Don't go. It's not fun, okay? Right? But the reality is, like, I guess, essentially, this should reduce that, right?
Yes.
Because it'll reduce discrepancies. It'll actually reduce the amount of times you got to go there because there's miscommunication between the landlord and the tenant.
Yeah, and if there is a dispute that arises under the agreement, when you make an application at the landlord-tenant board, it's clear to what the parties have contracted for. Quite what we used to see, and what we still kind of, I guess, do see, is that disputes arise because parties are unsure of what they're contracting for. When you complete this form in its entirety, it becomes much clearer as to what the rights and obligations of both the landlord and the tenant are.
In conjunction with like reducing the number of unnecessary processes at the LTB, a lot of people's complaint was that it takes so long to get your hearing.
Yeah.
This should reduce that timeline for people too.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's true. You know what? There's a lot of things in here, though, that I found really, really interesting, though, because it's funny because this is new, but all it does essentially is highlight rules that have been in effect since 2006.
Yeah.
So it's actually no new rules in the lease agreement other than you have to use this lease agreement.
Sure.
But it just highlights, like, I can't discriminate against someone who has pets.
Yes.
Not that I would. I am an avid animal lover, but I know and I've heard of people doing that, saying, I don't want to rent to someone with a dog. Right? Has anybody here done that? You're not on camera, you can say yes. Yeah, all right. There's a hand back there. You will remain nameless.
An important thing to remember, I think, is yes, you can't discriminate against someone because they want to bring a pet into the unit, but that doesn't take away from their obligation to keep the unit clean. And there's recourse for you as a landlord if you want to take steps to remove a tenant for keeping the property in such a state that it's unsafe for yourself as a landlord or other tenants. If the tenant is doing damage to the property, again, you have recourse in front of the LTB to take steps to remedy that.
We were talking about this a bit, though, because I think there's a big gray area on what's reasonable, right? Because what I think is reasonable to another tenant may not be reasonable, right? So what am I, like, really at the end of the day, what am I responsible for?
Well,
like, what is reasonable?
As a landlord, your responsibilities lie in what I like to call vital services. And those are things such as electricity, heat from September 1st to June 15th.
June 16th?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Running water and making sure that the property is fit for habitation.
Right.
As a landlord...
So bare necessities. Like,
bare necessities.
That is pretty reasonable then.
Right, and as a tenant, you're required to keep the unit clean and not have it fall to such a state of disrepair that it's unsafe for, like I said earlier, the use of the landlord or the use of other tenants. And there's obviously steps to be taken if one of those parties decides to not meet their obligations.
Yeah. Have you, now I know you probably use this term, maybe not. I know I have seen it, where you end up saying the tenant is responsible for any items $50 or less.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I know I've seen that. We look at lease agreements all the time when we're doing mortgages, and like, I get the justification for it. It's like, don't call me to plunge your toilet. Don't call me to change your light bulb.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So I've seen that clause many times. Is that something that would you still include that in a lease agreement going forward? Or would you still include it as a subsection?
There's the spot for subsections, right?
Yeah.
And I started doing that because I had a tenant call me and say, my lights don't work, and I'm in his house messing around, flicking the switch, and I'm going, I don't know what's going on here. Flick the breakers, and he had 6 pot lights that had burnt out over time. And he's just like, what, I have to replace these? And I'm like, yes, you have to replace these.
Is that reasonable? I agree.
I feel like it's reasonable.
But so, because that's not a vital necessity.
Right, and it's things like if the landlord and the tenant enter into an agreement and the agreement contemplates that there is going to be a stove and a refrigerator and a dishwasher, and for example the stove or the dishwasher breaks, well, as a landlord you need to replace that. You don't need to replace it with a better model or even of the same value. You just need to make sure that there is a working stove and or dishwasher in the unit. I like to use this example all the time because it's a case that had come up a long time ago in front of the small claims court, which, by the way, we got it dismissed on a jurisdictional issue. But for example, the tenant the landlord is responsible for the normal wear and tear to the property. If you have carpet installed in your property and over a long period of time tenants are wearing it out to the point where it's being frayed and it's in disrepair and potentially creating a safety hazard, well, you're responsible for replacing the carpet. On the flip side, if your tenant is in a rock band and is dragging a drum kit over that carpet every single day and it rips in 3 months, well, that's a situation where the tenant is likely going to be responsible for replacing the carpet due to an unreasonable level of damage inflicted.
So where does that go to? Does that get resolved in the landlord-tenant board then, or would that be resolved in another court of law? Like, who would resolve that then?
The landlord-tenant board has exclusive jurisdiction over matters that are arising out of disputes that arise under the Landlord or the Residential Tenancies Act. So, for example, if there's an issue and a tenant, for example, tries to sue you as a landlord in a small claims court, for example, well, I mean, without having all the facts in front of us, obviously not qualifying any legal opinions here, there's a strong argument Regency Law Group would make that the matter is properly before the Landlord-Tenant Board because it arises out of a matter that is contemplated under that act. So tenants' obligations, landlords' obligations, such things like if there's a flood in your basement and you air it out and try and basically do all the remedial work that's needed in order to get the basement back up and running, and the tenant has an issue with a mold claim, well, that tenant should be bringing that claim before the Landlord-Tenant Board, not before the Superior Court of Justice.
Have you ever had someone take you to small claims court or taken someone to small claims?
No. But I have had to go to Landlord-Tenant Board.
Yeah.
And the tenant took me to the Landlord-Tenant Board.
For what?
Another tenant broke into their unit. It's a long story.
Sounds like a Jerry Springer episode.
They broke the door of their unit and entered it like unauthorized, and they wanted me to evict him from the property.
Do they know about the police?
What are you calling me for?
Maybe we should back up this and talk about screening your tenants.
Yes, that's step one.
Oh wow, totally. So I guess that's good though. So that's good knowledge to know that the landlord-tenant board. You were saying, what is the period that you have to have recourse? Right, like it's 1 year. Like a tenant can only come back to the landlord for something that they want, like some sort of compensation for 1 year. Like if something happened a year and a half ago, they can't.
Yeah, so I mean that's a complicated question because it revolves around a limitation period, and a limitation period is a period of time with which you can seek legal recourse after a loss has occurred. And why that's kind of a difficult area to gauge is because the time at which the loss occurs can be a sliding scale. Sometimes, for example, if you slip over a carpet in your unit and fall and injure yourself, does the time start at that point, or does it start 3 months later when you realize you have post-concussion syndrome and discover that you may have a claim at that point? So there is a sliding scale there when a loss occurs. Generally, there's under the landlord-tenant board, there is a 1 year limitation period, but it also depends on the type of claim that arises and the type of loss that's being incurred in order to nail down exactly when the date is. What I generally like to tell people is give Regency a call. We'll look into it for you and we'll be able to answer your question.
Good man. I like that. Yeah. Do you charge NSF fees?
No, I haven't.
No?
No.
Does anybody here charge NSF fees? Anybody who's got a rental property? Something like that? Yeah. So how much do you charge, Chad?
It used to be $20.
$20?
Yeah.
Perfect. That's, you know what's funny? I've always wanted to charge NSF fees, but I'm just happy to get my rent at the end of the day. So I've just been kind of tipping on that. But it's actually now, it's topped at $20 now. You can't actually charge more than $20 for an NSF fee.
I've seen other landlords, they put in like $75.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you could charge a $20 NSF fee under the Act, I think, and under the new lease, that's the requirement. But there's nothing holding you back from sliding an extra provision in there for a convenience fee or an administration fee.
Interesting. Really?
No.
Okay. That's amazing. What do you think about, and one thing I saw in here, so like first and last month's rent, like you're only allowed to take first and last month's rent. Yeah. You can't take first and last month's rent and a damage deposit, right? And I've seen lots of people do that in the past, and you can't do that, right?
Yeah.
So, which I think is probably reasonable. Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
But there's one thing in here too that I've never really thought, and there's no specific language around, is that you're allowed to take a key deposit.
So a key deposit is a reasonable expense that you should be able to extract from your tenant. You can't go crazy with it because if the tenant is going to balk at it because it's a $600 key deposit,
it's a nice key.
You're going to need to substantiate.
Really good key. Yeah.
It's essentially you're held to a standard of reasonableness, which is what's the cost of replacing the key if it's electronic. That obviously is a factor to be considered, but generally a key deposit is a reasonable expense if you can substantiate the cost if the key is lost or not returned upon the end of the tenancy.
Got it. Have you ever incorporated into your agreements? I feel like I'm the only one doing everything wrong here, so I'm glad we're talking about this, guys. You guys are just perfect, okay? But have you ever written into the agreement something to the extent like, you pay me $1,200 a month, Brian, and in exchange, you shovel the snow, or you cut the grass, or you become my part-time landscaper, that type of thing, right?
Totally.
Have you ever done that before?
Totally.
So I'm curious, because I've done that as well too. Yeah. There's not specific language in here, but essentially it's saying you can't require the tenant to pay repairs or things that are the responsibility of the landlord. So by me writing that into the agreement, technically, I'm going against that clause. So I'm wondering has anybody else done that before with the lease agreement? Okay, you guys learn from all my mistakes, okay? That's why we were doing this here, okay? What could my liability be, or Tobias's liability, if he hasn't fixed his lease agreement yet? In that case, if I'm getting someone to shovel my snow. I think that happens a lot. First
person I would contact if you're looking to enter into a residential tenancy agreement is an insurance broker for commercial liability. Essentially, you need to make sure that if there is a claim against you, there's a policy that's going to back you up, and be sure to look at the deductible. But your duties are to maintain the property in common areas. So you have a duty to keep the parking lots clear, keep the common areas of the property in a safe condition. That doesn't mean that you can't contract with your tenant to do those types of things in a separate agreement, but that can't be included in the tenancy.
So it can't be this one. You'd have to have a sub-agreement.
Yeah.
So you could still do it, because I'd still be doing my due diligence as a landlord, saying that I am trying to keep the premises clean and free of debris and snow with this sub-agreement.
Not an ideal situation. Essentially, by coincidence, you're contracting someone who just happens to be your tenant to do the snow removal and the landscaping or whatever else you're contracting for at the property. I'm sure those agreements take place frequently. It's somewhat not advisable, just given the optics of the situation. That could lead to a very awkward situation where there is a claim. But I would be aware of what the landlord's responsibilities are in regards to maintenance and repairs. You do have a duty to maintain the property.
Gotcha. What do you do for your maintenance on all your properties? Because you've got about 1,000.
So I used to do it all by myself, and then we opened up the property maintenance company. My dad runs it, and he goes around weekly, cuts all the grasses, cleans up all the properties anytime it snows, takes the truck, snow blows the whole place, driveways, everything, because we have all multi-res. And then at the single family houses, we put the tenants in charge of it.
Do you? Yeah, so you do have that in there. Yeah. What was your turning point then to end up doing that? How many houses was it to get that?
It was
economy of scale, I guess. Yeah.
Five units. Yeah. 5 houses, 5 different locations.
5 different locations, and then it started to make sense to contract that work out to you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Very, very cool. Cool. Yeah. What do you guys think about the lease agreement so far? It's not that bad.
It's like a booklet. There's a lot.
Yeah, I know. Well, you know what? Being in mortgages, it's really kind of nice to have a standardized form. To be honest, you know what? Lenders end up asking for a lease agreement all the time, and now we've actually got a standardized form to end up doing it. Do you ever offer rent discounts?
We just did it.
Yeah?
Yeah, we just did it for somebody.
And how did that work out?
We'll see. Hopefully it works out well.
Like, what was the discount that you offered?
$50 a month for a year.
And why? What's the incentive? Like, what do they have to do to earn the $50?
They actually just asked, and we thought they were good tenants. And they said we're having a tough time.
Maybe we should,
That's a little steep.
maybe we should cut this right now.
Yeah, go to commercial.
Just asked.
Yeah. Tobias, can you?
But rather than
Can I have
negotiating,
$50?
No, but rather than negotiating a cheaper rental amount, we offered a lesser rent period for 1 year. Instead of taking an offer of $1,650 to rent the place, we took $1,700 with a 1 year period.
Gotcha.
Where we give $50 credit.
So do you give the credit at the end of the year or every month?
Each month.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Cool.
And, that's better than taking an offer. People sometimes, when they have tenants, they'll offer on a lease $50, $100 less or whatever.
Yeah.
And for us, it was better to take a 1 year term with a credit and then never be able to bump that rent back up to where it should be.
Cool.
Or where we felt it should be.
Right.
Yeah.
There's one in here. They mentioned the Ontario Human Rights Code in here, okay? So I don't know much about it. So I know good touch, bad touch. Okay, that's about But so when it comes down to, I've had. It's my lunch money. It's my collective arts right here. Okay, don't worry. You're good. Good touch. But made me lose my life. Okay, so but I've heard people before that have wanted to. You interview and you screen a whole bunch of tenants. And this probably happened to you before, right? And then you choose somebody that you think is good, but that means you didn't choose 3, 4, 5 other people, right? And then somebody, I've heard this happen to a client, say, oh, you didn't call me because of this, like because of a race card or because of some sort of discriminatory, maybe because I have a dog, you said I didn't get it. How does that, what should somebody do in that case? Is there any type of like
I think if you're screening tenants before they arrive, what you want to do is probably get professional advice from a lawyer at Regency Law Group to advise you on the types of questions.
We flash that up.
Cutscene.
Yeah. To advise you on the types of questions that you should and shouldn't be asking. I mean, ultimately, what I think you would want to do is have a standardized form of questions that you ask all of your prospective tenants that stay away from, some of the nitty gritty questions that might get you into trouble. And I think like in situations where, you don't want animals, and that is a very common type of I guess desire among landlords.
Yeah.
I haven't had too much experience with it. I'm hoping maybe you could shed some light on how you might screen your clients.
Yeah.
Well, we firsthand meet everybody, and we do have standardized rental application, and that's actually something else I didn't address with this yet, is through the real estate process when you hire a realtor.
When you hire Tobias Small,
when you hire
you gotta like follow the lead here.
We have our rental application, and then also we have an offer to lease, which used to often get written into it that all parties agree that this will form the final lease.
Right.
So now we don't have offers to lease with this anymore. So we can still do this, but the tenant can't make an offer to lease right now.
Oh.
Right? Or we have to take the offer to lease and then in addition to that do this paperwork as well.
So you're taking all those in, you're looking through them, and then you're deciding who the best tenant is based on you meeting them, your rental application, and then...
Which covers basic things. Name, who's going to live in the unit,
right?
What do you do for work, or where your income stream is from, and a credit check.
Yeah, I would get a credit check.
We do our best.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's good. Awesome. I sometimes just tell people I'm going to do a credit check and see what they do.
See what they say.
If they start to squirm, then
usually
I know.
They're just like, oh, I have bad credit.
Right. So do you tell, and I guess maybe this is a different question on that same sort of topic, do you tell the tenant that didn't get the place, or do you just not call them? Or do you just say like, Brian, you got the property, and Greg's just sitting there?
I just avoid at all costs.
Hungry.
Yeah?
And then they call, and I'm like, ooh.
And then if you just leave. No, I'm just curious.
If somebody asks, I'll just say, sorry, we selected another tenant. Typically, you don't get into it. Why didn't I get it?
We just selected another tenant.
We just selected another tenant.
You can give like
that had a really strong file. We selected another tenant.
Yeah.
That's it.
And is that a fair answer? And you're like, you don't have to, like, if someone asks you, why didn't you choose me as a tenant? You don't have to give justification. You just say, listen, we didn't choose you as a tenant.
Yeah, ultimately the decision is for you to make, because these are the people who are going to be occupying your property, and I wouldn't want to disclose any information that you're not comfortable disclosing, and that's where I would leave it.
Yeah. I definitely don't say it was because you had 4 Great Danes and 7 snakes and
It sounds like a real story.
Not working. Yeah.
Yeah.
And don't have a job. That's why we didn't pick you. No, don't say that. That's not the right answer. The right answer is we had another tenant we really liked.
Awesome.
Or just saying the tenancy is no longer available.
It's not available.
Very sterile.
Yeah.
Very
no longer available.
Yeah.
But if you'd like to buy a house,
yes,
we can send you to Mission35 to get pre-approved, and then we can avoid this entire problem altogether, right?
Don't like being uprooted. Call Bry, the mortgage guy.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, or Brenda, Teresa, or somebody else. Yeah, Chelsea. Awesome. Well, guys, anybody else have any questions? Is there any other questions that anybody has that for these expert, amazing rock star people right here? No? Cool. Well, I want to say, so we got to nominate who gets the Collective Arts, because our sponsor is Collective Arts. So great big thank you to Collective Arts. As soon as we turn it off, then it just gets crazy after that. Notice Greg has not had a sip of anything.
No.
The B-roll. No.
The B-roll. There you go, right?
But we got to have a comment for the night. So do we give it to Tobias or to Greg?
Right.
Greg?
Greg?
Tobias?
Tobias, a team effort, guys.
Tobias? Oh, God. Come on, we live in Canada. Everybody gets a prize. There you go, guys. Guys, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. You guys are absolutely awesome to donate your time. Thank you. Regency Law, if anybody needs any not free legal information, like you guys
Just call us.
just call us. Okay? or Tobias, world-class, great guy, Remax's Carbon, and honestly, ton of knowledge there. So, and of course, Mission35, need a mortgage, come on down, right? Next month, we're going to be talking about private lending, so tune in. It's going to be fun, and we're going to show you how to make some more money, okay? So thank you so much, guys. Make this a fabulous day.
Thank you.